The next section of the summary is the variables, so I actually jumped back to the focus section of the summary before I looked at the article again. Since the focus includes the hypothesis, I can use that information to figure out what variables I'm looking for. Remember, the variables are what the researchers are interested in. More specifically, researchers are interested in how variations in one variable relate to variations in another variable. Words like reduce, higher, and lower indicate change or variation, so that helps me know that stress response, self-esteem, negative affective states, positive affective states, and fear are all variables in the first hypothesis. The second hypothesis adds cardiovascular responses, and the third adds task persistence. The information about word count is how they define task persistence, so we might need to come back to that for the operational definition. The phrase compared to also signals that they're interested in two things or categories. And when I read more closely, I determined they were comparing two types of posture, upright and slumped. So posture would be a variable. Knowing that, I can start the variables and operational definitions section with a list of the variables, like in this slide. I already knew where to start looking for details about the operational definition because of what I noticed when I was looking for the participants paragraph. The graphics and the pictures about posture got my attention right away, particularly because it's somewhat unusual to see pictures like that in journal articles about psychological variables. So I started by skimming the section right after the participants. In this case, it was the procedure, starting on page 634, though usually the materials or measures section is next. The first thing that caught my attention was the phrase, to measure. I stopped and read that sentence more closely and realized it was explaining how the study measured blood pressure and heart rate. I remembered that one of the variables was cardiovascular, and I was pretty sure that was related to heart rate, so I highlighted that information before I started skimming again. The next phrase that jumped out at me was randomly assigned. Since that's a phrase that is usually used to describe how participants are put in groups in an experiment, I knew it was a signal that they manipulated a variable. The rest of the details in the paragraph were about random assignment, not how they actually manipulated the variable, so I kept reading. Then I found the information about what participants were asked to do if they were in the slumped condition and if they were in the upright group. That's what we need to know for the operational definitions for the posture variable. At first, I thought the sentence started about physiotherapy tape was part of the manipulation. But as I kept reading, I realized I wasn't sure why they mentioned the tape. The information about the LED markers, though, was important. When I kept reading, I realized that was part of the measure of whether they actually created different postures when they manipulated that variable. The next part that caught my attention was the reading task. It definitely explains how they measured something. It uses the phrase served as a behavioral measure of psychomotor retardation. But psychomotor retardation wasn't in my list of variables, so I'm not sure how that fits. Then I got to the section labeled stress task. When I look back at my list of variables, I realized that one of the variables is stress response, which makes me realize the researchers needed a way to know participants were stressed, or they needed to measure stress. When I looked at the paragraph about the stress task, I realized how they did it. They used a procedure that's been used in other studies to induce stress. Yes, that means they intentionally stressed the participants, or at least attempted to stress them. When I'm summarizing an article for a project, I sometimes highlight the information as I go along, like I do here, and then later copy and paste it when I'm done with the whole article. In other cases, I skip highlighting and just copy and paste the information I want as I'm going along. This is what my summary would look like at this point if I did it as I was going along. As you watch these demonstration videos, you'll notice I use my own shorthand in the models for the worksheets. I find that makes it easier to focus on the relevant information. I also find it's helpful to think about how I use formatting to organize information. It can make it a lot easier to make sense of things. Over time, you'll probably develop a similar system for various tasks, if you haven't already. I'll talk about the measured variables in the next recording, since that's a little bit more to think about.